Welcome to WCG Talks Trials, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of clinical research, sharing the latest trends, insights, and best practices from experts across the industry. In each episode of WCG Talks Trials, we'll explore a different area of the clinical trial industry, while featuring a diverse range of clinical research and medical professionals. If you're passionate about advancing clinical research, improving patient outcomes, and driving healthcare forward, then WCG Talks Trials is the right podcast for you. We are so glad you could join us today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Geoffrey Schick, Director of Strategic Site Partnerships at WCG, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's episode, discussing highlights and takeaways from the WCG MAGI at Home virtual conference last month. Before we dive in, let me remind you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on your favorite listening platforms like Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify, so you never miss an episode of WCG Talks Trials. I'm joined today by fellow MAGI at Home speakers, Sandy Smith, Jess Thompson, and Wesley Warren. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Before we get started, just like to ask each of you to tell us 30 seconds about your current role and organization, and maybe a quick snippet on how you got involved with MAGI. Jess, can I ask you to go first?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. My name is Jess Thompson. I am the founder of the Association of Clinical Research Project Managers, and I am super happy to be here. I've been with MAGI for about 8 years now, and I got started running project management workshop, and that really has kind of helped pivot my career, really leaning into project management. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today.
Thank you, Jess. Sandy, can I ask you to do a quick introduction?
You bet. I'm Sandy Smith, Senior Vice President for Clinical Solutions and Strategic Partnering at WCG. And in that role, I work a lot with sites on helping them reach their research goals. And I got involved with MAGI about 4 years ago with real active involvement, speaking and recruiting speakers, soliciting new topics. But prior to that, I valued MAGI that I sent members of my former teams that were involved in the contracting and budgeting space.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And on the far West Coast, joining us today, Wesley, can you do a quick self-introduction?
Of course. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. My name is Wesley Warren. I'm Executive Director of Research Strategy and Partnerships at City of Hope. We are a nonprofit cancer hospital based out of Pasadena. My interactions with MAGI have always been very positive. Like Sandy, I kind of attended before I became a speaker and was eventually invited to co-present with an industry colleague who I had negotiated several contracts kind of against in the past. And it's kind of blossomed from there. I really valued the partnerships and the people I've met and the things I've learned over these past several years working closely with MAGI. I'm looking forward to continuing that relationship.
Fantastic. So once again, I thank each of you. I appreciate all of you being willing to share a little bit of your time today with us. But let's jump into our topic for today's episode, which is, again, it was the MAGI at Home virtual conference held last month in October. And I'm not sure who wants to jump in and take this one first, but I'm wondering if you can share more about WCG's MAGI conference series, what it offers for those who haven't had an opportunity to attend either in person or virtually. Who can give us a little bit of a summary in terms of what that conference is about and what attendees have come to expect?
Yeah, Jeff. So there's a number of tracks, obviously, that really appeals to different functional groups within research, whether you are working in more of the ethical review space and contracts and budgets. And I think the nice thing is we're always introducing new topics, more contemporary topics for some of the things that maybe are pressing issues and challenges for site sponsors and CROs. And I'll tell you, this morning, I was just speaking to a very large site who said they really haven't recovered since COVID in terms of being able to send people to conferences. So this individual attended the virtual conference, was very complimentary, but she said, we really don't have a travel budget. And that didn't just extend to their team members, but also to the leadership team. So this individual is just really pleased that we have a virtual offering. And I know one of our sites this year sent 28 members of their team. So to be able to share continuing education and keep everybody motivated, up to date with what's going on, MAGI really does fill a space.
Yeah, fantastic. And this was the second year of WCG offering the MAGI at Home virtual conference. Jess or Wesley, how does the virtual conference difference a little bit? What are some of the pros and cons of a virtual format from your perspectives?
Yeah, Jeff, I've been to and presented at both MAGI at home or virtual and in person. I think the virtual sessions, the virtual conferences offer a couple of unique benefits. First of all, like Sandy said, the attendance is more flexible. It's cheaper. You can get your continuing education credits in that way without having to fly across the country. One of my favorite things this year in my sessions was people seemed to be more willing to kind of engage and ask questions using the virtual platform because they can do so anonymously. Whereas I feel like sometimes in person, we can go down rabbit holes and develop themes that don't really reflect everyone in the room, what they're thinking or wondering about. One of my other favorite things is that the sessions are all on demand after the fact too. So, you're busy working kind of through the week while the conference is going on, but you can go back and have a refresher later on whenever someone's asking about, FDA's diversity and action plans. For instance, you can go back and have a refresher on the great session that we had this past month.
And just to add in and kind of piggyback off of Sandy, I think it's very important for our sites as well, because we really can't send all of our site staffs to go to attend a conference because then the studies don't continue to run. Patients are going to need to be on site, and most coordinators can't really step away from their job for 4 or 5 days to go attend a conference. And so I really like that MAGI has really started to pivot towards this. I was very thankful that I was actually asked in the first at home, and I just saw it even from then to attend and speak and just say, okay, like, what do we need to do to make sure that we're continuing that education, to continue those conversations, because those can be stuck in between those conferences. And I attend a lot of conferences. I know most of you guys on this podcast do, but it's really for those individuals that can't attend in person too, because what I get from conferences is really that renewed drive, that renewed spirit, a lot of motivation. And so those individuals, especially at the site level, that can't always leave and go to attend these conferences, it's so important to really get that experience from home or from their office or wherever it needs to be, but you're still getting that continuing education, but also getting that community that is so important in clinical research.
And Jeff, one more comment is I think that managers, as they are continuing to adapt to a remote environment, particularly if their teams are widespread across the country, you can leverage having a bunch of people go to this and have sessions afterwards where you're debriefing on different topics that people may have attended. So it really does help to build teamwork among the research offices as well.
Excellent points. So I want to ask each of you kind of what your top takeaways from this year's MAGI at Home event were based on the sessions and the tracks that you were involved with. And Wesley, I'm going to put you on the spot first because you were mostly involved in the contracts track. What do you think were the top takeaways from the contracts track or things that stood out of note from your perspective?
Yeah, I think MAGI is doing a great job keeping that track pretty fresh. We've had this going for a long time. MAGI was originally started to address agreements in clinical research, but they've really done a great job updating the agenda and keeping things fresh, like I said, based on industry trends. This year, some of the main kind of key themes that I saw pulling through, despite what the sessions were intended to cover, kept coming back to several different things, mostly focused around data, big data, real world evidence and pragmatic trials, how we manage contracting and what those look like. On the flip side of that, how AI and large language models have a role in, or research of those utilizing AI and large language models, how it needs to be contracted around the specific kind of pressure points. We also saw some benefits from leveraging AI in managing and or negotiating contracts, which was actually very insightful and helpful. And then one of the other big themes that kind of shone throughout the week was a focus from the session attendees on agreements other than clinical trial agreements, because we're getting into more of the data and the biospecimen research, more research collaborations and things like that. And maybe part of it is that we have a lot of sophisticated folks attending these conferences. They really want to kind of deep dive past those clinical trial agreements and into some of the more novel and unique and one-off scenarios, which has been fun because then we get to have kind of a, live think tank on those types of things.
I'll say that anytime we have a session where we're bringing different stakeholders together, like those that have site sponsors and CRO reps on the same panel, always of high interest in that collaboration and the spirit to really want to try to work together, reduce timelines, reduce burden. I think those are always well attended. But the one that really made my heart beat a lot this year was the session we had on the role of advanced practice providers. And certainly there's some trailblazers out there that are using advanced practice providers or APPs in very novel ways, including research. But surprising to me that as people weighed in the chat, there are more and more sites that are using APPs. And again, it's in a variety of ways, but overall seeing that role evolve more in research. So well attended, lots of interaction and lots of requests for follow-up information.
And I'll jump in too. So I mostly attended the project management courses and that track. I do need to finish up. I love that you guys recorded it so that way we can kind of go back, especially if two were happening at the same time. I really think that that's important too, because how often are we kind of stuck of like, both of these would be so good to attend. I really like that we have that access to be able to then go back and watch some of the ones that we were unable to attend. But a lot of the ones that I attended were actually things that I present on a lot, just so that I can get other takeaways and different perspectives. So a lot on change management, risk management, project management. And it was interesting to kind of see over the last few years, and I feel like MAGI does a really great job, like Sandy said, of putting all the key players on the same panel. So you're not just going to have a site panel if there's going to be stakeholders involved from CROs or sponsors. You're going to have all of those individuals on one panel to have those conversations. So I think that that's been really interesting to see over the last, especially few years post-COVID, to then have those conversations and think through how we can continue to work together and to grow this industry together rather than it being us against them. So a lot of what I saw was a lot about collaboration, about communication, about understanding that the people on the other side of the email are humans too. And I just really like that we've started to kind of talk about the human element of clinical research as well. And that's been kind of my takeaway with MAGI specifically being very forward thinking in that and having that space for the collaboration, for the continuing education, and for that mental health to be put in those conversations as well. So those are kind of the things that made my ears perk up, was really just focusing on how do we do what we do better together and how do we build from that.
Yeah, I think those are important points. And I'll echo what each of you has said in terms of one of the great things about MAGI, and especially the virtual MAGI, is that the participation from different facets of the clinical trial industry, right? Of having sponsors and sites willing to share the same session, as Sandy alluded to. And, I think in the compliance and the budget negotiation tracks, we had great discussions between sites and sponsors on topics like fair market value and billing compliance and the pros and cons in terms of whose responsibility is. I don't know we solved all the problems, but it was great to hear the perspective and understand where the other side of the equation is coming from, to understand differences and common threads, common ground, to be able to, hopefully work better together in the future. One of the key sessions for the MAGI at Home conference was our session on the FDA's Diversity Action Plan, where we actually had a representative from the FDA. Sandy, I want to put you on the spot a little bit. Can you share some of the top insights from that session that you believe will impact clinical trials?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So clearly, no one is going to argue that having diverse and representative participants enrolled in clinical trials, it's got to be a good thing. This is not a new topic. So the DEPICT Act, which was the Diverse and Equitable Participation in Clinical Trials, it was really first introduced in 2022 and passed by Congress in December of 2022. And there's been a lot of fine tuning since then. So there was another document that was released in June of 2024 with an open comment period that closed at the end of September. And with this latest document, talking more about the sponsor's role in determining what that diversity action plan looks like. So I think many sites, they've looked at their mix of representation in clinical trials Will site selection be solely based on whether or not you have representative populations? I think that that will be of benefit to some sites, but I don't know that it'll absolutely exclude any, because we're not just looking at racial and ethnic minority populations, we're also looking at age, we're looking at gender diversity. And so at the end of this, it should be that if we can get the right representation in clinical trials, those results can be generalized far more than to just the likeness of the individuals that were on the trial. So we know that we've been missing with some of the results that have been generalized well beyond the participants that were enrolled in trials. Now, sponsors will be providing sites with information that they have on representative groups. And I think that there's a bit of a wait and see that many are thinking, well, it's the sponsor's requirement, and it is, but sites are also going to have to be prepared for how they're going to respond to that. Some of the things that sites have already been doing that enroll representative populations is looking at community health workers or navigators, building that trust within the community. A lot of education goes on with this. So more to follow. And this will not be for every single clinical trial, but really those that the pivotal data would likely lead to an FDA approval.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think that's the piece that sites especially are coming to grips with, trying to understand how broad or how narrow those points of emphasis are going to be and how it might alter their intentions on conducting the trials within their communities. And it's been a challenge that's been out there for decades, right? And we could do a whole separate podcast, and Sandy, you have, on the whole diversity issue and as it relates to enrollment. But I mean, I remember when I started clinical trials research around the year 2000, NSABP was doing specialized grants to put people into underserved communities to try and see if it would directly affect enrollments by increasing education. So it's a challenge we've been struggling with for decades. And hopefully this plan, and again, bringing sponsors and sites together, can start to create that change slowly but surely for better performance in these trials.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to jump in and just say that I think that from a site perspective, again, with these study coordinators who can't really leave their desk for long, they're the ones who are really asking these questions too. That, we get to see FDA at some of the conferences, but not really a whole lot virtually. We can't really ask a lot of questions, right? We get the guidelines, but we don't get the how-tos. And so I really appreciate that's part of the MAGI at Home, is bringing in FDA, bringing in those speakers who are available and can answer some of these questions, because we all know the guidance documents are always very high level. They don't really talk about the what to do in the day-to-day. And so I feel like bridging that gap has been so important. And I really just applaud MAGI for bringing that into the space so that coordinators and site staff do have that access that they may not typically have.
Great points. Thank you. As was mentioned earlier, you were all speakers at the MAGI at Home event. I'm wondering if you can each talk a little bit more about your sessions. We currently have an open call for speakers for Boston in May of 2025. So can you talk a little bit about how your sessions went? Any key insights or takeaways? What would potential speakers, what would you think they should know if they are looking to get involved? Because again, we're always looking for new perspectives. We had great representation from first-time speakers for this virtual conference. Want to continue that both in Boston as well as virtual next fall. Jess, let me ask you to take the lead on this one. Tell me a little bit about the sessions you coordinated or that you spoke at. What brought the energy to you from that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to take this question on because it's something that's so near and dear to my heart, because most people don't know that MAGI is actually where I really started speaking. And I credit MAGI to so much of my career success because it really did teach me how to speak and that I could speak in front of individuals. So I would say first and foremost that if you are interested in speaking and you have something that's really near and dear to your heart, you're passionate about, put in a form for that call for speakers. Because one thing that I have found personally, the organizers are all very willing to aid in helping you perfect your presentation, really giving you some hints on how to be a good speaker. And it's just such a great environment of learning and opportunity. So if you've ever thought about speaking, MAGI is a great place to start. I actually started at one of the in-person conferences on the project management track. And now I am very excited and happy to lead that. at a lot of the conferences. And one really cool thing about MAGI too is they've really embraced the opportunity to be a little bit more creative in the way that we present. And if you've ever seen one of my presentations, that's something that I really love to do. I love to do some kind of theme or some kind of anything really just to bring some joy, because we all have really hard jobs. And MAGI in New Orleans, we did project management lessons from Barbie. We are still looking for a theme for next year. So if you're listening to this, please toss in some theme ideas. But what I really want to say is that, I would love that MAGI is not really a stuffy conference. It's very much about connections and having those conversations that are so important. You can have those conversations with the speakers after the session or at different networking events. And I just think that that's really important too, is that MAGI allows so many opportunities to connect with the speakers and to connect with other SMEs in the industry. And that's really how I feel like my career has been developed in clinical research, is attending these events and getting to know other speakers and really finding my passion and my niche in clinical research. And I attribute so much of that to MAGI. So please put that call for speakers. And my biggest takeaways this year have been that the engagement. I just love how engaged the audience is becoming in a lot of these conversations. It's always hard to do a presentation and nobody asks any questions. And I was very lucky to present with Wes, and we had so many questions and so many good conversations for that. So again, I really think for me, it's that conversation and the connection that MAGI at home provides and MAGI in person provides. So just a big shout out to MAGI. I'm always a fangirl. So happy to be speaking and continuing to speak and encouraging others too.
Wesley, Sandy, anyone, and any other thoughts in terms of, tell us a little bit about which session you presented at, and, maybe what were some of the key questions that were kicked out at the team?
As we prepped for the sessions that I did, one of the things that always fascinates me is, number one, generally folks are more than happy to be asked to speak, but as Jess said, raise your hand as well, because we're always looking for new perspectives. But when we do the prep sessions, I just find it fascinating that we could have been recorded live at the time, because folks do have things to say. They have varying perspectives on topics, and the networking that happens, the new professional relationships or friends that are created as a result of it. And I do want to, call out Jess for her themes. I will admit I had not seen the movie Barbie prior to the New Orleans MAGI, but I watched it afterwards and I was like, oh, they did really good on their outfits. So adding that creativity, the fun into, the topics that sometimes can be a little mundane, but everybody comes there wanting to do a great job. So why not have a little fun with it?
Excellent points. Wesley, can we ask you, how did your experience as a presenter go for the MAGI at home session?
Sure. Yeah. MAGI had me working hard this time. I presented at 3 sessions, one of which with Jess, like she mentioned. The 2 others were in the contracting track. I presented on Clinical Trial Agreements 101. And then also at the end of the week, we kind of closed it out with a Stump the Experts panel that I was on. I think the most important takeaway that I found from that was how encouraged I was to hear from so many people who aren't contracting professionals, members of research study teams or regulatory coordinators or folks who work on the IRB wanting to learn more, which is great because they're interested. They want to learn more so they can continue to partner with and support their colleagues and better understand kind of the whole process. As for future speakers, one of the things that I think really helped me kind of tiptoe my way into speaking via MAGI was the reassurance that MAGI needs people from all stages of their career, all various experiences. It's important to have that kind of diversity of thought and diversity of perspective whenever we're talking about industry trends. Myself, now I lead a team, and so I'm not in the trenches every day negotiating agreements and seeing these themes emerge the same way that some people who are, handling the meat and potatoes clinical trial work are on a day-to-day basis. So it's important to have that. And that's what, I would encourage everyone who is thinking about it or interested or thinks they can bring something to the table to reach out to MAGI, see if there's an opportunity. It's kind of one of those things, like Jess was saying, that keeps the conference very, very useful for everyone.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. So we've talked about it a little bit. Now we're getting ready for MAGI 2025, which will be May 18th through 21st in Boston. Boston, great city to host a conference in, very close to Harvard University, to MIT. Don't have to walk very far to find a lobster roll if you're looking for a bite to eat or to visit Faneuil Hall. But in terms of the conference, what would attendees for the MAGI 2025 conference, what should they expect?
Jeff, there is a real intentional effort to keep it fresh. So having new topics introduced or a new spin perhaps on an existing topic, making sure that it's not necessarily a rehash. There's some basics that will always be there for maybe early in career attendees. But I think that keeping up with the evolving trends, and we know healthcare in general and clinical research specifically, we are in an evolving state. There's always going to be something new coming up. Boston's a great venue. And again, in person, we have the opportunity for exhibitors to be added. So having that interaction with exhibitors. And I'll just leave you with the thought that there's usually puppies that make an appearance.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. If MAGI could just send everybody a puppy for MAGI at home or something, that's the one thing missing from MAGI at home is the puppies. But also to add in, one of my other favorite things that MAGI does in person is the Innovation Challenge. It is such a cool opportunity to stay on top of what's happening in the industry. What are people thinking and doing that's different? How can that influence you to be different and think outside the box? So the Innovation Challenge is always something I love hearing and watching and exploring with the audiences, and then the moving the needles, because and the Stump the Experts. Wes brought up Stump the Experts as well. The Innovation Challenge, moving the needle, where we talk about what can we actually do in this industry to move forward, and then Stump the Experts. Those are always fun.
Jeff, I think that Sandy put out a good call for Boston in general, but Boston in the spring is a lovely place to visit. One of my favorites. Great to walk around. But as far as MAGI goes, in person, the networking and the connections that you make within your industry are kind of unparalleled, to be honest. It's folks both who kind of have the same role as you, but then also counterparts. So, I make connections with folks who are in other cancer centers, and we can bounce ideas off of each other. Throughout the year, I get to know people on sponsor side, and again, can just kind of do a pulse check. We kind of, we all learn from one another. Aside from that, it's everything else that you guys said. I mean, it's the innovation challenges and just the energy that it all brings. I'm a fully remote employee typically, and so this is one of the times that really helps me kind of re-energize and connect to the mission that I'm working towards. So I really appreciate MAGI.
Yeah. Fantastic comments, everyone. Thank you. So, and Jess, you mentioned at the Moving the Needle session from New Orleans, the white paper that's going to be a byproduct or result of that session is soon to be released. But before we wrap up, I just want to thank you, Jess, Wesley, and Sandy for joining us today, sharing your insights on this episode of WCG Talks Trials. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you have any questions or would like more information about this topic, please feel free to visit wcgclinical.com/MAGI. We hope you found this episode insightful and that you'll join us for future episodes of WCG Talks Trials. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of WCG Talks Trials. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred listening platform as we continue to explore different areas of the clinical research industry. As always, we encourage you to join in the conversation. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics you'd like to hear on the show by visiting us at wcgclinical.com/podcast. We're here to serve as a trusted resource as we work to improve lives and accelerate clinical research together.